I was still pulling off my coat when my aunt grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't mention your work situation tonight, sweetheart. It'll bring down the mood." She said it like she was doing me a favor. 3 hours later, my sister's boyfriend leaned across the dinner table, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I'd never survive even a phone screen at the hospital where he was about to become the newest attending physician. So I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and said, "Actually, I'm the chief of medicine. I run that department. Your interview is Monday morning. I'll see you then." But I'm getting ahead of myself. The drive to my aunt's house in Westchester took 40 minutes longer than it should have because of a storm coming off the Hudson. I sat in the parking strip outside her colonial for almost 10 minutes before I got out of the car. Through the front window, I could see silhouettes moving against the warm yellow light, could hear the muffled rise and fall of voices and someone's laugh, sharp and theatrical, that I recognized as my sister's. I hadn't seen most of this family in 8 months. I had let birthdays go unreturned. I had sent my aunt a Christmas card with a gift card inside and 0 personal note. To them, I had essentially vanished. What I had actually been doing was surviving the most consuming stretch of my career. I'm 32. I'm a physician and a hospital administrator, which is a combination that sounds impressive until you understand what it actually costs. I had spent the last year embedded in a federal review process as the interim department head at Hargrove Medical Center in Manhattan, a mid-size hospital that had been flagged by the Joint Commission for systemic compliance failures. The previous chief of medicine had resigned under pressure. 3 other senior physicians had followed. Someone had to step in and hold it together while the board conducted its search for permanent leadership. I had been that someone, initially for 90 days, and then, quietly, and without much ceremony, indefinitely. In March, the board had voted. The position was permanent. I was the chief of medicine at 32, the youngest in the hospital's history, the first woman to hold the role. I had not told a single person in my family. Part of it was timing. The appointment came during a stretch when I was working through weekends, sleeping at the hospital some nights, managing federal auditors during the day, and staffing crises at 2 in the morning. There had been no moment that felt like a celebration. And then the window for telling them passed, and then it kept passing, and eventually my silence had calcified into something my family interpreted as shame. My mother texted me in February, heard the hospital had some problems. Hope you didn't get caught up in that. I replied, "I'm fine, very busy, talk soon." That was the last real exchange we had before tonight. I rang the bell. My aunt answered immediately, like she'd been standing at the door. "Sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted exactly 1 second before she stepped back and looked at my face with the particular expression of a woman preparing to deliver bad news gently. Come in, everyone's here." She took my coat and lowered her voice. "I just want to say before you go in, don't bring up work tonight, okay? It's Lee's night. And I know things have been difficult for you, but tonight is about celebrating her. She's so happy right now." I looked at her. "Okay," I said. "I just think it's better," she said, patting my arm. "These things happen to everyone. The healthcare industry is brutal right now. You'll find something." I didn't correct her. I just smiled and walked into the living room. My sister Lee was 26 and lit up the way only people who are certain they are the center of the universe can be. She was perched on the arm of the sofa with her left hand extended, ring catching the light, surrounded by our cousins who were all taking turns holding her fingers and making sounds of genuine delight. She spotted me across the room and waved. "You made it. Come look." I made my way over and admired the ring, which was large and very shiny and clearly expensive. "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. "Grant picked it out himself," she said, blowing. "He researched for months." Grant was standing nearby, a glass of scotch in his hand, talking to my uncle. He was 34 with the particular brand of confidence that comes not from achievement, but from the lifelong expectation of it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of practiced ease that works well in rooms full of people who are already inclined to like you. He was completing his residency at Hargrove Medical Center, my hospital. I had reviewed his file exactly once, briefly, in a context I will get to. He noticed me and broke away from my uncle. "You must be the older sister," he said, extending his hand. "That's me," I said. "Congratulations." "Thanks." He glanced at me in the way some men do when they're trying to place you in a hierarchy. "Lee mentioned you're in medicine?" "I am," I said. "Which hospital?" "Hargrove," I said. Something shifted behind his eyes, a recalibration. "No kidding," he said. "I'm at Hargrove, finishing up my residency." "I know," I said pleasantly. "Small world." He seemed to expect me to elaborate, to offer my department or my role, to fill the silence with credentials the way people do when they're nervous. I didn't. I just smiled and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. He tried again. "What department?" "Administration mostly," I said. He nodded slowly, processing this as the non-answer it sounded like. "Tough time to be in hospital admin," he said, his tone shifting toward the comfortable condescension of someone who considers administrative work adjacent to real medicine. "With everything Hargrove went through last year, I heard some of the leadership took a real hit." "They did," I agreed. "Glad they're getting it sorted out," he said. "The new chief is apparently very aggressive about restructuring. A lot of the old guard is nervous." He leaned in slightly. "Between us, some of them should be dead weight." I took a sip of my water. I said. Across the room, Lee was laughing at something one of our cousins had said. My aunt was bringing out a charcuterie board. The evening had barely started, and I already felt the particular exhaustion of being in a room where no one is quite seeing you. We sat down to dinner an hour later. My aunt had made her pot roast, the one she brings out for significant occasions, and my uncle had opened 4 bottles of wine. The table conversation was warm and wide-ranging for a while. Lee and Grant's engagement timeline, where they might live, whether they wanted to buy before rates went up further. Normal things. Good things. Then my cousin asked Grant about his plans after residency. He set down his fork and seemed to grow an inch. "Actually," he said, "I'm in the final round of interviews for an attending position. Cardiology. But not just any position." He paused for effect, and he was good at pauses. "Hargrove just opened a senior attending slot in the cath lab. It's one of the most competitive cardiology positions in the metro area. They're interviewing externally for the first time in 6 years." My aunt made an appreciative sound. "That is impressive." "They had over 200 applications," Grant continued. "I'm one of 4 candidates left. The final interviews are with the department head and the chief of medicine directly." "Wow," my cousin said. "The chief herself?" "Apparently she's very hands-on with senior hires," Grant said. "Very particular. I've heard she's tough." He shrugged with practiced modesty. "But I'm not worried. I've prepared." I looked at my water glass. "Grant has been preparing for months," Lee said proudly. "He studies constantly. He's always reading clinical journals. He's so dedicated." "I'm sure," my mother said warmly, looking at him in a way she hadn't looked at me in quite some time. "The thing about positions like that," Grant said, spearing a piece of roast, "is that they're not just about clinical competence anymore. They want people who understand the administrative side too, the strategic vision. Most doctors don't think that way." He looked across the table. "No offense to the people who stay in the operational trenches. This was directed at me, casually, without eye contact. It's a different skill set." "None taken," I said. "I just think the future of medicine is physician leadership," he said. "Not administrators who've never practiced, making decisions they don't understand. Real doctors in real leadership. That's what Hargrove's moving toward under the new structure." He took a drink of wine. "Anyway, I'm told the final conversation is essentially a formality at this point. They like me, I can tell." He smiled. "Some things you just know." My mother caught my eye across the table with a look I recognized, the one that said, "This is what success looks like. Pay attention." I smiled back at her and reached for the breadbasket. The conversation moved on. Grant held the floor for most of the rest of dinner, talking about the cath lab, about cardiology trends, about his research interests. My aunt asked him thoughtful questions. My uncle refilled his glass first. Lay watched him with uncomplicated adoration, and I sat at my end of the table and ate my pot roast and thought about Monday. Because Monday morning at 10 o'clock, I had a final interview on my calendar. Cardiology attending, senior cath lab position. Candidate, Grant Holloway. I had not reviewed his file before tonight. I knew his name because my assistant had prepared the interview packet and sent it to me Friday afternoon, and I had glanced at the cover page and then set it aside because I'd had a board meeting running late. I had planned to read it over the weekend. I was now very interested in reading it. Dessert was a lemon cake my aunt had ordered from the bakery down the street. While the table was being cleared, Grant leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the casual generosity of someone preparing to offer charity. "You know," he said, "once I'm in at Hargrove, assuming everything goes the way it looks like it's going, I might be able to put in a word for you, if you're trying to find something in administration there." He glanced at Lee briefly, then back to me. "I know it's a competitive environment right now, but internal recommendations go a long way." "That's very kind of you," I said. "I just think it helps to have someone on the inside," he said. "Someone who can vouch for you. The admin structure at Hargrove is going through a lot of change right now. They're bringing in new people. The right connection could make a real difference for someone in your position." My aunt nodded along like this was a generous and reasonable thing to say. I put my napkin on the table. "I appreciate that," I said. I picked up my phone to check a message that had just come in from my deputy. Then I put it back down. "I'll keep it in mind." Lay walked me to the door when I said my goodbyes an hour later. She hugged me and smelled like her perfume, the same one she'd been wearing since she was 17. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I know things have been hard. I know you've been struggling." "I haven't been struggling," I said gently. She pulled back and looked at me with soft, worried eyes. "It's okay if you are. You can tell me." "Lay," I said, "I promise you, things are fine." She searched my face and didn't find what she was looking for, which was probably confirmation of her concern. "Okay," she said finally. "Call me more." "I will," I said. I drove back to the city in the dark with the radio off, thinking. The weekend passed in the way that pre-confrontation weekends do. Quietly on the surface, loud underneath. I ran on Saturday morning. I meal prepped. I read through Grant Holloway's interview file with the same methodical attention I give to everything that lands on my desk. It took me about 40 minutes to find the first problem. Grant's residency evaluations were good, strong even in the clinical components. But 3 of his attendings had flagged the same pattern in language that was careful but consistent, difficulty accepting feedback from peers, occasional tension with nursing staff, strong individual performer, less effective in collaborative settings. In a specialty like interventional cardiology, where the cath lab runs on exactly that kind of precise, trust-based collaboration between the cardiologist, the scrub tech, the circulator, the anesthesiologist, those notes were not minor. The second problem was in his research record. He had listed a co-authored paper as the primary research, a significant finding in a notable journal. I pulled the paper. He was 4th author on a 6-person study. The primary and secondary researchers were senior faculty at his medical school. His contribution, listed in the acknowledgements, was data entry and literature review. This was not unusual for a resident. What was unusual was listing it on his application as his research without any of that context. The third problem arrived by email on Sunday night. One of the 4 candidates had withdrawn from consideration. I now had 3 candidates for the Monday interviews. I opened the updated packets and cross-referenced with my notes. Then I checked with my deputy on the scheduling. Grant Holloway was slotted for 10 o'clock. He would be meeting with me, my deputy chief, and the head of cardiology. I closed my laptop and went to bed. Monday morning I wore charcoal gray. I was in my office by 7:30, reviewed overnight notes from the hospitalist team, signed off on 2 policy updates, and had a brief check-in with my deputy before the interviews began. Dr. Yolanda Ferris, head of cardiology, joined us at 9:50. She and I had worked together for 8 months and understood each other the way people do when they've been through something difficult together. "You ready?" she asked. "Always," I said. At 10 o'clock, my assistant's voice came over the desk phone. "Dr. Voss, Mr. Holloway is here. Send him in." The door opened. Grant Holloway walked in the way he'd walked into my aunt's dining room, shoulders back, smile on, the full presentation of a man who expected the room to receive him well. His suit was new, his shoes were polished. He was carrying a slim leather portfolio that he probably imagined signaled seriousness. He crossed toward me with his hand extended. "Good morning, I'm Grant Holler." He stopped. The smile didn't just fall, it deconstructed, piece by piece, like something load-bearing had given way underneath it. His hand stayed out for a full 2 seconds before he brought it slowly back to his side. "Dr. Voss," I said. I did not stand. I gestured to the chair at the far end of the table. "Please, sit down." He sat. He looked at Yolanda. He looked at my deputy Richard. He looked back at me with the eyes of a man rapidly recalculating a great many things. "I want to be transparent about something before we begin," I said. "I became aware over the weekend that you're engaged to my sister. I want to confirm for the record that this interview will be conducted identically to the others. Your relationship to my family will not benefit you. It will also not disadvantage you. Is that understood?" He nodded. His mouth was slightly open. "Good," I said. "Let's start with your application." What followed was 50 minutes that I suspect Grant Holloway will think about for a long time. I asked him about his evaluations, not in an accusatory way. I asked him to reflect on them, to describe his growth areas, to tell me about a time he'd received feedback he disagreed with and how he handled it. He gave the answers people give when they've rehearsed for the question they expected, not the one in front of them. He talked about always striving to improve. He talked about being coachable. He said the word collaborative 4 times without once describing an actual collaboration. Then I asked about the paper. I set the printout on the table in front of him and asked him to walk me through his specific contribution to the methodology. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then he said, I was involved in the full research process. The acknowledgement section lists your contribution as data collection and literature review, I said, which is a meaningful contribution and a normal one for a resident. But your application describes this as your research in a way that implies primary authorship. Can you help me understand that framing? Another silence, longer this time. I felt that my involvement, he started. Walk me through one methodological decision you made on that study, I said. Just one. He couldn't. Yolanda took over from there, asking clinical questions. Specific, detailed, the kind that require not just knowledge but the practice fluency of someone who actually thinks in the specialty every day. Grant knew the material at a resident level, which was where he was, but the position was senior attending. The gap was evident within the first 10 minutes of a questioning. And to his credit, he stopped pretending partway through. He just answered honestly, which was the first real thing he'd done in the room. At the end, I folded my hands on the table. Grant, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve that and because I think it's more useful than the alternative. You're a good resident. Your clinical evaluations show real aptitude in procedural work. With the right mentorship, you could have a strong career in cardiology. I paused. But this position requires someone who is already operating at the attending level, independently, collaboratively, and honestly, and your application, in a few specific places, overstated your current position. That's something I take seriously, not because I want to penalize you, but because the cath lab runs on trust. Trust between physicians and staff, between physicians and patients. If that foundation has cracks before someone even walks in, I can't build on it. He was very still. The position won't be offered to you, I said. I'd encourage you to continue your residency with full attention, to build out your collaborative record, and to apply again in a few years if you're still interested. Hargrove will still be here. I stood. Thank you for coming in. He stood too, slowly. He looked hollowed out in the way people do when the version of themselves they've been performing collapses. Does Lee know? He said. His voice was quiet. Not angry. Just tired. What happens outside this room is between you and her, I said. What happened in this room is between you and your career. He picked up his portfolio and walked out. Yolanda waited until the door clicked shut. Well, she said, that was not the interview I expected on a Monday morning. None of them are, I said. By that evening I had 11 missed calls, 4 from Lee, 3 from my mother, 2 from my aunt, 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my aunt's landline, 1 from my cousin who I didn't know had my number. I called Lee back first. She didn't cry right away. She started angry. You humiliated him. He came home and he was devastated. He said you ambushed him. He said you used the interview to punish him for something personal. I didn't, I said. I told him at the start of the interview that his relationship to me would have no bearing either way. I meant that. He said you went after him. He said you picked apart his application. I asked him to explain his own research contribution. He couldn't. Silence. And the evaluations, I said. His attendings flagged collaborative issues. Lee, this is a cath lab position. That matters. He said those evaluations were unfair, that those attendings had it out for him. I didn't say anything. They all have it out for him, I said finally, gently. Another silence, longer. He told my mom you were jealous, she said, but the certainty was draining from her voice even as she said it, that you'd been passed over for things and you resent. Lay, I said, I'm the chief of medicine. I gave him the interview you heard he was going to. I told him the truth about his application, and I told him what he'd need to build if he wants to apply again. That's not ambush. That's the job. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. You're the chief, she said. Since March, I said. I should have told you. I'm sorry I didn't. Why didn't you? I thought about how to answer that honestly, because by the time I had something to say, I wasn't sure anyone would believe it. And I'd gotten used to you all having your version of things. I paused. That's on me. I should have corrected it. She was quiet for a long time. He said his research listing was standard practice, she said finally. Not defending him really, just laying it out. It isn't, I said. She went quiet again. I'm going to need some time, she said. I know, I said. Take it. My mother called the next morning. Her version of the conversation was shorter and considerably louder. She said I had undermined Grant out of jealousy, that I had always resented Lee's relationships, that I had embarrassed the family, that my aunt was furious, that this was not how family behaved. I let her finish. Then I said, Mom, I'm the chief of medicine, R. Grove. I have been since March. I run the hospital where Grant did his residency. He applied for a senior attending position in my department and I interviewed him. He misrepresented his credentials and couldn't defend his application. That's why he didn't get the job. The silence on her end lasted so long, I thought the cold had dropped. Since March, she said. Since March, I said. And you didn't tell us? I didn't, I said. And I'm sorry for that. I should have. Another long pause. We thought. I know what you thought, I said. I know. And I let it go on too long. That's my fault. She didn't speak for another moment. Then, are you okay? It was such a small question, such an ordinary one, and it cracked something loose that I hadn't expected. Yeah, Mom, I said. I'm okay. I'm really okay. I've just been busy. She laughed, very briefly, a small sound like something releasing. Busy, she said. My God. Lake called again 4 days later. She asked if she could come over. She arrived with a bottle of wine. She clearly didn't know how to pick, because it was a very expensive Burgundy that she'd probably just grabbed from a shelf at random, and she sat on my couch and tucked her feet under her and said, He came clean. What did he tell you? That the research thing was intentional, that he'd seen other people do it, that he figured no one would check. She turned the wine glass slowly in her hands. And that the attendings, 2 of them, at least, he knew why they'd flagged him. He said he'd been working on it, but he hadn't told me because he didn't want me to worry. She looked up. He said a lot of things he'd been not telling me, so I wouldn't worry. I didn't say anything, just waited. I'm not. She stopped, started again. I'm not breaking up with him because of the job. I don't care about the job, but I keep thinking about all the things I just accepted, because he said them with so much confidence, because I wanted it to be true. She looked at the window. That's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing, I said. It's how confidence works. That's why it's effective. You weren't fooled. I had his file, I said. I had information you didn't. That's not the same as being smarter or more perceptive. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she used to when we were kids, and she was trying to figure out whether I was telling the truth. Why didn't you say something at dinner when he was talking about you in the trenches and all that? Because it was your engagement dinner, I said, and because I didn't know yet what I knew by Sunday. She nodded slowly. What do I do? I don't know, I said honestly. I think you ask him the things you've been not asking because you trusted his confidence, and you see what the answers are. I poured us each more wine. That's all I've got. She laughed, a small rough sound. Okay, she said, that's enough. She stayed until 11. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Grant, about our grandmother, about a trip we have planned for years, about her job and my job, real things, things without performance or polish. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in maybe 5 years, and I hadn't realized until it was happening how much I'd missed it. My aunt sent a long formal text 3 days later. That was her version of an apology, which meant it acknowledged that she had perhaps not had the full picture and hoped we could all move forward. I thanked her and meant it. My mother started texting more. Small things, articles she thought I'd find interesting, photos of the dog. One afternoon she called just to call, which hadn't happened in so long I almost didn't answer because I assumed it must be an emergency. It wasn't. She just wanted to talk. As for Grant, Lee made her own decision on her own timeline without me in the room for any of it. What I know is that she came back to my apartment 2 weeks later without the ring, with the same overnight bag she'd probably grabbed in a hurry, and asked if she could stay for a few days. I said yes without hesitation. She slept in my guest room and ate cereal for dinner the first 2 nights, and gradually, slowly, began to seem more like herself. She got a new project at work that she was excited about. She started running in the mornings. One night she came home with Thai food and we sat on the floor of my living room and watched 3 episodes of a show we'd both been meaning to start, and she fell asleep before the 3rd one ended, and I turned off the TV and left her there under a blanket. There's no tidy ending to this. My family is still my family, complicated and imperfect and full of assumptions they've spent years making about me that will take time to undo. My aunt still talks too much. My mother still worries in the particular way that looks, from the outside, a lot like criticism. And I still don't tell people things I probably should tell them. But something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a slow, quiet realignment. The kind that happens when people finally stop talking around each other and start talking to each other instead. I went back to work. I still run the hospital. I still drink too much coffee and miss too many dinners and send texts that say sorry, swamped, soon. But I call my sister now. Actually call, not just text. And she picks up every time. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough. I keep thinking about the pot roast. Isn't that strange? Of everything that happened that night. The ring, the toasts, Grant telling me I was in the operational trenches like he was doing me a kindness. What I keep coming back to is my aunt's pot roast going cold on my plate while I sat there and said nothing and let them have their version of me. I've thought a lot about why I let it go on so long. The silence, the assumptions, all of it. And honestly, the uncomfortable answer is that part of me had started to believe I owed them that story. Like my silence was a kind of debt I was paying. Like staying invisible was the polite thing to do. That's not humility. That's just a slow way of disappearing. What Grant didn't understand What none of them understood is that the work I'd put in over the previous year wasn't just about a title. It was about being the person who stayed when everyone else left. The hospital was in real trouble. The federal reviewers were in the building. Physicians were resigning. And I showed up every single day, made hard calls, protected staff who deserved protecting, and built something functional out of something that had been broken. That's not something you get to fake. You either have it or you don't, and the only way to build it is to keep going when it would be easier to stop. Grant had the confidence. He'd practiced it, but he hadn't built the thing underneath it yet. The real competency, the honest track record, the ability to sit across a table from someone who knows the work and defend your choices without flinching. When I asked him to walk me through one methodological decision on that paper, and he couldn't, it wasn't because I'd set a trap. It was because there was nothing there to find. Confidence without foundation isn't arrogance. It's just a gap waiting to be revealed. And I don't blame her for believing him. That's the thing about people who perform certainty well. They make doubt feel like a personal failing. She'd been working so hard to build her curated, beautiful life that she'd stopped asking the questions that might complicate it. It took something undeniable, his own words in his own voice, after the fact, to make her look directly at what she'd been choosing not to see. What I know now, sitting on the other side of it, is that doing the right thing rarely announces itself. It usually just looks like showing up on a Monday morning and doing your job with integrity. It looks like telling someone an uncomfortable truth when it would be much easier to pass them along and let someone else deal with it. It looks like telling your own family who you actually are, even when you're not sure they'll believe you. The three things that got me through it, through the hard year, the merger, the federal auditors, and yes, that dinner, weren't complicated. They were just knowing the difference between right and wrong, and acting on it even when no one was watching, staying curious and honest enough to follow evidence instead of emotion, and refusing to quit when the work got hard enough that quitting would have been understandable. Leigh calls me now. She called last Tuesday just to tell me about a restaurant she tried. That's a small thing, but I've learned most of the things that actually matter are small. The pot roast, on the other hand, was genuinely excellent. I should have eaten more of it.